So step one is to break 3 eggs and to weigh what they come to without their shells. And this is surprisingly insignificant when it comes to the final result when it's all done. Ooh, hope that one's okay. Yes, it is. Yes. So there I've got my 3 eggs and it comes to 6.5 ounces. Now for step 2 I need exactly 1 1/4 times the weight of the eggs in wheat grain, because I'm going to mill my own flour using the Kenwood Chef. And so the eggs were 6.5 ounces, so for 1 1/4 times that, it's not going to be quite exact. I'd have been better off in metric, I suppose, to be exact. But I'm going to want 6.5 plus 1/4 of 6.5, and near enough that's going to be another 2 ounces. At least it is for the grain. When I come to actually weighing the flour out, I might try and be slightly more precise. So let's measure out some wheat grain and try not to spill it all over the floor when I open the packet. I suppose that would be a good test for the vacuum cleaner. So there's the 6.5 just gone over, and I said approximately another 2, so that'll make it 8.5, and that's a fraction over. Doesn't matter too much if I've gone a bit over here. As I say, I can measure the actual resulting flour a bit more precisely, and any spare can just go in the flour tin along with the ordinary flour. So there's ingredient number 2, wheat grain ready for home milling. My next 2 ingredients are exactly the same weight as the eggs in honey. Actually, set honey works really well, but clear honey does work as well in this, and I haven't got any set honey at the moment. So I want 6.5 ounces of honey. This can get slightly messy if you're not careful. It's actually gone slightly over, only by 0.1 of an ounce though, so I think we'll live with that. And I've put that straight into the Kenwood Chef bowl, because the next thing that will happen with this is it'll get creamed with 6.5 ounces, same weight as the eggs, of either butter or margarine. In this case I'm using block stalk margarine, which I know from experience works really well in this recipe. So 2 6.5s will come to 13. Well, they did when I was at school anyway. So let's hope I can get this right. 11.5, 12.3, 12.7. It's bound to go slightly over, isn't it? There's no way I'm going to get it bang on. 13.1. Well, I think we can live with that. And it matches the honey as well, because that went over by 0.1. So there we go. That's the next 2 ingredients. And in fact, apart from baking powder and gooseberries, that's the last of the ingredients. I'll just mention the gooseberries very briefly. These are from the freezer. They were last July's crop from the garden. Nice red dessert gooseberries. When they're frozen, you can just knock the stalks and the buds off very easily, so I'm going to do that in a second before they defrost any further. And I've got exactly ½ pound of gooseberries there for this recipe. And as I say, the only other ingredient now is the baking powder, and that just wants a teaspoonful in with the flour. So let's go on. This next part's going to be too noisy to talk over. So I've got the wheat mill set up on the Kenwood Chef. So this is the A901e Kenwood Chef. with the wheat mill attached to it. It goes onto the high-speed outlet at the, sorry, not the high-speed, it goes onto the power outlet at the front of the machine. So for that you just remove the cover plate where the mincer and other tools of that type would go, shredder, etc. And there's a little chute on the bottom of it which can be directed either into the bowl or out to a separate container. I've got this one going straight into one of the spare bowls I've got for the machine. And so I'm going to pass the wheat through, first of all on setting 4. It won't go through on a lower setting straight away because it's too big to go through the rollers. Then I shall empty it out of the bowl back into here and pass it through again on setting 2. And finally I'll repeat that process on setting 1, which will give me a really fine and airy flour to work with. So as soon as I turn the machine on, and by the way, the instruction book says to use the wheat mill at full speed, but I find that the machine rocks quite a lot at that, so I put it onto about half speed, which is perfect adequate. You won't really be able to hear much once it's on, but I will try and get you a couple of closer views of what's happening. So here we go. So there we've got the wheat through on the first pass on setting 4 on the mill, and as you can see, I hope you can see, it's a fairly coarse wholemeal flour we've got there with plenty of bran in it. So I'm going to stop the camera, I'm going to pop the flour back into the smaller bowl so I can tip it back in the hopper. I'm going to then go on to setting 2 on the flour mill and put that through again. I might run the motor slightly faster this time because there's not so much strain on it now that it's broken down, and then there'll be a final pass on setting 1. we go, that's the flour through on setting 2, and you might have just noticed I was using a pastry brush there to help it down the hopper rather than sticking my fingers in. Social distancing, coronavirus and all that, but actually just also a little bit nicer, I think, to use a brush than your fingers. So I'm just going to stop the camera and tip the flour through again into the smaller bowl, and then it'll go through one last time on setting 1. I won't bother recording that, you've seen it go through twice, but I will show you at the end of it what the flour looks like when it comes out. So here's the flour after it's been through that third and final pass on the setting number 1. And I'm just going to try and get a decent close up if I can. I think that's in focus for you. So hopefully you can see that's a nice fine flour now. So that just wants 1 teaspoonful of baking powder added into it at the point that it goes into the cake mixture. Oh, I've said the word cake, I've given away what I'm making. Okay. So here we are then with the honey and the margarine in the bowl. And we've got the FlexiBeater creaming tool in the hub of the machine. We've got the splash guard fitted back on, and so now we're going to just put the head down and we're going to cream the honey and the margarine together until they're smooth and silky. And that takes very few seconds, and actually that's not quite perfectly smooth yet. I can just detect 1 or 2 small bits of marge stuck to the beater, so I'm just going to get the spatula to scrape those off and do it for a few seconds longer, but I'll do that off camera. We have the honey and margarine creamed nicely together, so now with the mixer running on a fairly slow speed, I'm going to add about half the egg mixture. I say mixture, all I've done is beat the eggs a little bit with a fork just to break the yolks up. Then I'm going to add about half of the flour, and I have just put 1 teaspoonful of baking powder in there as well. And then I'll put the other half of the egg in, and finally the other half of the flour, and mixed until it's just nicely mixed in. No need to over mix it, in fact that'll make a very heavy cake. So here we go on low speed, so I'll go on to minimum speed. And there we have it. We've now got the cake mixture. Nice consistency, all mixed in, ready to fold in the gooseberries. So now I've attached the folding tool. You don't need to use this. You can just put the gooseberries in and stir it twice with a wooden spoon and that's it. But I've got a folding tool, so why not use it? And so we'll put the head of the Kenwood down into the bowl. The gooseberries I have topped and tailed. I mentioned before how easy it is just to flick the tops and tails off when they're frozen. And I've rinsed them under cold water just to make sure there's no little bits stuck to them. There's a bit of a dilemma for me here. I've made this cake 3 or 4 times since I first designed the recipe. If you let the gooseberries fully defrost, I actually think the cake cooks slightly better. But it's so much easier for the gooseberries to get split, squashed and destroyed, even if you fold them in by hand, if they're defrosted. if you put them in when they're only semi-defrosted like these, there's much less chance that you'll spoil the gooseberries, and it's nice to have whole gooseberries in the cake, but in my opinion the cake doesn't cook quite as well. Anyway, I'm going to put them in at this stage, partly because, as I say, they don't get broken, partly because I'm impatient, and partly because it means that I can finish this film off in one go, which I guess is kind of being impatient anyway. So here we go. I'm going to put the machine on minimum speed, tip the gooseberries in, and it'll not be more than at most 10 seconds of folding, and then they'll be done. You could, as I say, do it so easily by hand. And that really is it. The gooseberries are just folded lightly into the mixture so that when I tip it out into the tin to bake, they're fairly well distributed. So here's the final step. The mixture is now ready to go into the tin. I do like a good loose bottomed heavy gauge tin. This one's a pre-war one of my grandmother's. Actually, it bakes the best cakes out of all the tins I've got, and most of them are pre-war. So it's approximately a 9-inch tin, and I'm just going to tip the mixture straight in. Oh, and by the way, I do like modern things. I've cheated with lining the tin. Grandma would have had a fit. She'd have been brushing it with melted butter and then either sticking strips of greaseproof paper to the sides and a circle to the base, or she would have been putting a little flour in, tumbling it round and tipping the excess out to lubricate the tin. But I'm afraid I go for these greaseproof paper tin liners that just slot in like an oversized bun case, and job done. And you don't need to worry too much about the creases in the paper, the flukes in it, because actually when the product comes out at the end of it, it doesn't seem to bother the texture or the appearance at all. So mixture in, as you can see, it's quite a nice stiff mixture. So even if you're using a loose bottom tin, if you do line it the old fashioned way, it's not a mixture that's going to run out through the bottom of the tin. And I'm just gently easing it to the sides of the tin, and use my fingers, they are clean, I've just washed my hands for the umpteenth time, to scrape the last of the mixture off the spatula. If you like, you can at this stage sprinkle a little bit of granulated sugar over the top, which will give a nice crunchy finish to it when it's baked. I don't think I'm going to bother doing that on this occasion, because actually it's very sweet with all that honey, and I think that's quite adequate, really. But as I say, you can always put it on if you want, or when it comes out of the oven you can dust it with a little icing sugar or something like that if you wish to. So that's now going to go into the oven, and it's going to go in at gas mark 6, whatever that is in modern money, I can't remember. Let me look at the oven and I'll tell you in a second. It's approximately 200, or just under 200. And I'm using a fanned gas oven. I'm sure it works equally well, maybe even better in an electric fan oven, I don't know. But I have to say that I'm delighted with this fanned gas oven, and I wish I'd known about them years ago. I'd have replaced my cooker far before I did if I'd known. Makes fantastic cakes, and I can bake up to 7 cakes at once in this oven. So there you go, that's the mixture. And no, I still haven't told you what it is yet. We'll find out when it comes out at the end, but I mean, you can see it's a cake and it's got gooseberries in, and it's a recipe of my own. So later on you'll get some pictures of the finished product, I hope.